you, God, for all that you have enabled us to do. And thank you for the privilege of being together on tonight. It's in his name that we do pray. Amen.
Amen. Rashida, where are you?
I was just trying to unmute myself.
Okay.
Everyone. So I'm going to share a hidden word from the writings of Baha'u'llah. And it's the first hidden word that says, "O son of spirit, my first counsel is this: possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, that thine may be a sovereignty ancient, imperishable, and everlasting." And this is a chant in Hindi. He Atma Putra, Mera Pratham Paramarsh ye hai, Ek Shuddha Dayalu Evam Prakashmay, Hriday Dharan Kar, Taki Puratan Amitevam Ananta, Shreshtata ka Samraj Tera ho.
Thank you, dear Dr. Reverend Darrell Horton and Rashida, for those wonderful prayers. In introducing Dr. Henderson, Dr. Henderson told me not to say too much about him, so I took the 10 pages I was going to read to you and threw them away. But nevertheless, I want you to know Dr. Henderson, as a member of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of America, our highest elected body that manages the affairs of the Baha'i faith worldwide, America-wise. He has a PhD in education from UMass. He has served on a couple of Bill Clinton's committees for race unity. He's the author of a great document called, what was it called? The Models of Unity that he co-wrote in Chicago. And then I also would tell you that there is a document that is called The Vision of Race Unity that was published some time ago that Bob Henderson had a lot to do with. But you don't want to hear me talk, you want to hear Bob Henderson talk. So ladies and gentlemen, what a delight, what a privilege to introduce you to Dr. Robert C. Henderson. It's all yours, Bob.
Well, first of all, thank you, Ajit. And I was getting a little nervous there for two reasons. One, I thought you'd go on too long with the whole background thing. And second, I saw that I was muted and I couldn't unmute myself. So I thought, how is this going to work? But first of all, I just want to say hello to everyone, and especially my old and dear friends. I see so many of you on the screen, and you know, one of the difficulties with these Zoom meetings is you see on your computer screen this mosaic of faces, and the tendency is to look everywhere at everybody and be a little bit disoriented. But I wanted to take a moment because we are in the midst of one of the greatest crises our nation has ever faced. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the historical origins of that crisis and what we as Baha'is believe about the destiny of America and what we think and are doing about that. But I also wanted to add some aspects of what's going on in the greater nation, because, you know, we see all of the senseless violence against Black citizens. And, you know, commonly in the news media, it's referred to as senseless violence against Black men. But all of us who follow these things know that children have been the victims, women have been the victims, and men have been the victims. It is about Black people. I'll never forget when my then 9-year-old, Miles, was riding his bicycle in a neighborhood about a block from our house. And he was caught off by a policeman who accused him of stealing his own bicycle. And Miles, how does a 9-year-old defend himself against the accusation that his own bicycle doesn't belong to him? You know, that's a thought that had never crossed his mind. And so when the policeman asked my son, "Where do you live?" and he gave his home address, the policeman's response was, "That's not possible." Because the assumption was that a Black child couldn't live in that house. Now, my son was not without resources. He asked the policeman if he knew another policeman in the Wilmette police force. And when the policeman said, "Well, how do you know this officer?" My son said, "He comes to our school in Wilmette and he teaches us about the traffic laws and he warns us against the dangers of drugs and alcohol and so forth." And so it was clear that he was a resident in that town. But should a 9-year-old Black child have to prove himself to defend his own bicycle in his own neighborhood? You know, so my point is that is nothing in comparison to the shootings and the suffocations and the asphyxiations and all the things that people are suffering. But it goes to show you the pervasiveness of the challenge that we face and the need for us to have organized thinking about what this all means and what we should do about it. So I wanted to go back a little bit and give a little bit of a historical perspective in terms of America and in terms of the spiritual expectations set by all of our religions about the development of unity in the heart of humankind as being in the plan of God. Then I wanted to talk a little bit about the Baha'i view of the destiny of America and the priority of race unity. And I wanted to give some examples that would perhaps help us think about the full range of things that are going on, because it is all not just racism and discrimination and violence. There is also a very strong pattern of constructive activity, which we should know about so that we can support and get actively involved. So let's go back and just review for a moment the expectation of the founders at the point when America was established as a nation. Because, you know, we have a vague recollection of what was in the heart of the founders at the time. But this is what they said. They dreamed dreams of the establishment of the first nation in the history of life on this planet that was by the people, of the people, and for the people. And what they said were things like, we have it in our power to begin the world all over again. They said the past is the textbook of tyranny, but the future is the Bible of the free. They said that if you spill a drop, one drop of American blood, you have spilled the blood of the entire world, because this nation is composed of all people from all places. No less a personage than George Washington himself said that the bosom of America is open to people of all nations, all religions, and all races. He said, let them come here and intermarry, that we can build one nation and one people. That was the vision expressed by Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson and Ralph Waldo Emerson and George Washington at the point when the nation was being constructed. But as you know, all those aspirations of one nation under God with liberty and justice for all were undermined by the trade of economic development for human freedom of African Americans. And when that unholy exchange was made, it corrupted the spiritual intent of the democracy itself. And we saw and we see a chain of events that have subject Black people and white people and the nation as a whole to the corrupting influence that any one of God's children has less spiritual and human value than all of God's children. It's interesting to note that at the same time slavery was being established as the economic foundation of the American nation. You know, it's important to know that although we were established in 1776, by the middle of the 19th century, shortly 50 years later, we had the biggest economy on the face of the planet because of slave labor. And the development of northern cities and western cities and the territories of throughout the United States were the result of the efforts of an economic engine that was propelled by chattel slavery. So at the very same time, there was a man in Europe. His name was his name was George Fox. And he was a Quaker who never actually came to the New World. But he wrote to the richest and most powerful Quaker in the New World, a man named John Woolworth. And he said, I have been pondering the task of beginning a new nation that is based on participatory democracy in which all human beings are created equal. And he said, I have prayed and pondered and reflected on the issue of whether a democracy can be built with an economic foundation that depends on the enslavement of Africans. And he said, I have come to the conclusion that it cannot be done, that it is against the law of God. And so he asked John Woolworth, who was very influential among the Quakers, to go to all of the main Quaker houses and spread this message and talk to people. Now, Woolworth at the time owned 400 slaves. What he did was he freed all 400 of his slaves, and he gave them portions of his land according to the amount of time they had worked on that land. So not only did his slaves gain emancipation, they gained property. And he went around and used his influence and George Fox's arguments to convince his fellow Quakers that slavery was against the law of God. So from the very beginning of this nation, we had three impulses at work. The first was to build a nation of liberty and justice for all, a nation by the people, of the people, and for the people. The second was economic development and prosperity, which actually victimized people and caused them to be defined as having only 3/5 the value of a white man. And the third was this spiritual and social effort to convince America that the subjugation of any one of God's children was against the law of God himself. So this is the environment of social and spiritual conditions in which the nation was conceived. And on one hand, our principles of liberty under law, our principles of the rule of law, our principles of a democratically founded constitution, all of those principles were an impulse for the spread of democracy on a global basis. They were an impulse for the emancipation of peoples. They were an impulse for the development of civil society on a global scale. But at the same time, we had yet to come to grips with the need to exorcise the demon that somehow one people is of greater human value than another people. So let's go back to the Old Testament and let's just remember some of the things, some of the expectations that were set when God created the world and all of us. You know, that beautiful beginning of Genesis, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And we know by that the intent is a spiritual creation that will be shaped, influenced, guided, and accountable to the Creator of all of us. And in that time, when mass communication was impossible, when people weren't able to travel, a time where modern conveniences simply didn't exist, God gave us through the Holy Book a vision of what the ultimate development of the world would be. And what he said was that in the end, we will establish the kingdom of heaven on earth. And he gave us a way of understanding what the characteristics of that kingdom would include. He said that in that time, I will give them one heart, and I will put a new spirit within them. And he said that I will write my law on the inner tablets of their heart, and they will be my children, and I will be their God. He said that this will be a time when the lion and the lamb will lay together. And he wasn't talking about animals. He was talking about the spiritual and social characteristics of human beings. Those with lion-like tendencies and those with lamb-like tendencies would make peace. That we would find those spiritual qualities that were the essence of the hidden word that was chanted so beautifully in Hindi. That hidden word in English says, it talks about having a pure, kind, and goodly spirit, that thine may be a sovereignty ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. That is the intent that God infused into the purpose of creation. And he said that in that time, we will go through test and trial and various stages of development. He forecast that he would send us many messengers, and we know them as Buddha and Krishna. We know them as Abraham and Moses. We know them as Christ. We know them as Muhammad. We know them as the Bab, and now we know them as Baha'u'llah. But he said that all those messengers would have extensions of one truth: the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood and family of human beings, and the spiritual purpose of creation. And he said that that it would all culminate in this kingdom of heaven on earth, where we would be possessed with a unified heart, galvanized, as consciously recognizing ourselves as members of the same human family, and where we would have the law of God written on the inner tablets of our heart. He said we'd see with new eyes and think with a new mind. And what did he mean by that? That our minds would be reoriented to the law of God. The primary law of God is love, obedience to him, and service to his children. And that our hearts would be trained in a new way. And that we would recognize all women as our sisters, all men as our brothers, all children as extensions of our essential responsibility to love and care for everyone. and to carry on an ever advancing community. That was the spiritual foundation that God laid for us to help us understand the purpose of creation, the evolution of our spiritual and social development, and what the end and aim of creation would include. So when we ask ourselves about our current status, and we say, well, how did we get here? We see this as, we can see this in two ways. One, as the turbulent process of our half-stepping, if you will, in compliance with the laws and the teachings of all of the religions we have ever believed in, because no religion said that we should subjugate others in the name of God. No religion said that we should victimize others in the name of God. No religion said that we should create laws, policies, institutions, and social practices which deliberately disadvantage one group for the profit and benefit of another group. There is no religion that says that. So I wanted to go back and talk a little bit about the democratic origins of the nation and the spiritual origins of humanity itself, just to put our current circumstances in the perspective of a vast historical and spiritual process that began at the moment of creation. And what I wanted to say to you was that in the Baha'i view, we are at a critical turning point in that process. The teachings of Baha'u'llah say that this is the dawn of the maturity of humankind on this planet. That all the things that we had thought and believed in the past no longer fit the needs of current reality, no longer contribute to the development of human being, human well-being, equity and justice. And so he says that this is a stage in which knowledge will proliferate. He says that this is a stage in which the nations will ultimately be bound together. He says that this is a stage in which we will gradually come to recognize the oneness of human creation and that we are all children of the same loving Father. And he says that in this new age, we will develop a consciousness and a sense of urgency driven by the understanding that humankind is one spiritual family and that protection of the entire family is the greatest assurance of the protection of any individual member of the family. In the Baha'i belief, our writings tell us that America has a special role to play in the process of establishing this consciousness of the oneness of the human family and the establishment of international peace. Our writings tell us that God has given this nation a mission, and that in that mission is the establishment of the eradication of all racial discrimination and bias. And not just the eradication, but the establishment of true unity among people of all colors, all cultures, all races, all religions. It says that this nation will go through test and trial, but it will emerge as a champion of international peace and the standard of the oneness of humankind. And our writings are clear. They say that America has been given this challenge, not because it has special national characteristics. There are not inherent qualities of the nation itself that justify such a gift from God. But it is because precisely that we have violated these fundamental rules, that we have corrupted this sense of human equity and equal human value and the oneness of humankind, that God has chose to demonstrate in a land that enslaved Black people, that land can be completely transformed to become a foundation for the unity of all people, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. So with that as a backdrop, I'd like to give a few practical examples, and perhaps we can set it up this way. In a recent letter by the international governing body of the Baha'i faith, the Universal House of Justice, that's how Baha'is refer to it, they have spoken to the issue of the crisis of racial injustice in the United States. And what they've said is that this is a turning point in the destiny of the nation itself. They've said that those who believe that this is a problem of social development or economic distribution are confused and they are in error. They said this is not a social and economic development problem. This is fundamentally a moral and spiritual problem. And the implication is the Baha'i teaching that if we were all of the same value, if we practice this principle, this galvanizing principle of the oneness of humankind, then it would compel us to recraft our institutions, to rewrite our social policies, to look differently at how our society operates, how our schools educate, how our justice system adjudicates and brings fairness and equity to the land. The kinds of development opportunities that we provide people of all colors and backgrounds. All those things would be changed permanently if we were to address the moral and spiritual implications of racial injustice and discrimination in the context of what all our religions have taught over the expanse of human development. So I wanted to give some examples of how this process is coming about. Because as Baha'is, we believe that the holy books of the messengers are the guides we live by in each dispensation. But we also believe that the messengers themselves bring a tremendous power that has a spiritual and social transforming influence over the entire creation. I mean, for example, let us just refer to Jesus Christ. If you summarized all the things that Jesus actually is reputed to have said in the Bible, it would come out to be about 11 pages. Now, the Bible is very thick. 11 pages is not that thick. And we know that this was a time before email, before text, before YouTube. We have very sketchy notes about all that, the circumstances that surrounded the conditions in which Christ lived and taught. So how is it possible that billions of people know his name? Billions of people still follow him. Billions of people eagerly await the fulfillment of all of the promises that he made. That's the spiritual power that comes with the manifestation himself, with the messenger of God himself. And likewise, in the Baha'i dispensation, we have, Baha'u'llah has written 125 volumes of guidance on everything you could possibly think of, from parenting to the collective security of nations, from the private practices of prayer to the organization of the funds of our faith community. All of these, it's a religion that specifically speaks to the challenges of the modern age. But in these teachings, Baha'u'llah has brought a special sense of spiritual urgency. He said that freedom from racial prejudice is the supreme injunction of the faith of Baha'u'llah and the hallmark of a true Baha'i character. Our writings tell us that the Baha'i community will not grow and will not prosper unless it advances the issue of the unity of the races in the United States and on a global basis. Our writings tell us that our community has to be organized in a way that we don't simply pay lip service to these issues. He said, in your home, in your hours of leisure, in your social activities, in your business practices, with your children at school, with your families at play, in every aspect of our lives, we are to live this principle and make it real. And he gives us guidelines for how we structure that conversation, because there's a lot of pain and hurt associated with the history of racial injustice in this country. And our writings speak specifically to how we transform that pain into a new level of understanding and a new level of cooperation. So I wanted to give some examples, because one of the things that I mentioned was that the coming of a new messenger also brings a kind of spiritual influence that accelerates the development of social institutions and consciousness and education and mathematics and science and law and everything. And it has its own influence on the advancement of society, along with the specific teachings that the manifestation brought us. So let's just look at some examples of how that's all working. I wanted to mention that in our society, there are two dominant streams of activity. One is the victimization of people in virtually every aspect of life because of their color. Countless books have been written about this. You all know those stories. At the same time, there is a line of development that we don't pay a lot of attention to, that is extremely important. In fact, it is indispensable from the solution to the problems we face, and that is the development of models of interracial and intergroup cooperation and understanding. Now, it happens that that in the Baha'i faith, we've paid a great deal of attention to studying the development of these models, because these are examples of how people are figuring out how to rectify some of the ills in society. So I'll just give you some examples. In Chicago, which is unfortunately known for some of the violence, especially in Black communities, and where I lived for 30 years. There is a housing project, or there was a housing project called Cabrini Greens. And it was one of the areas of the city that people didn't even like to drive through, because it had such a reputation for violence and for danger. And as we began to systematically collect models of unity, one of the models of unity we found was right in Cabrini Greens. So here is this area with very tall prison-looking like buildings. They're very tall buildings. They're ugly buildings, and they were cramped together with little green spaces between the buildings. But those green spaces had long since gone to seed and were really now just dirty. Well, every day, some years ago, a white man from the North Shore would come to Cabrini Green, put on basketball knee pads, and get on the dirt and get between the buildings and start to systematically clean the dirt between the buildings. Now, nobody bothered him because they thought he was insane. And, people believe all kinds of things about insanity, one of which, unfortunately, is that it's contagious. So nobody bothered it. And they just used to say, well, that's that crazy white man. And he comes here every day at 5 o'clock and he puts on these basketball knee pads and he picks junk out of the dirt. But pretty soon, a group of kids started to gather around him and say, well, what are you doing? He said, I'm about to plant a garden. And because he came every single day, pretty soon there was a group of kids who were helping him clean the dirt. Well, as time went on, they created gardens between all of the buildings in Cabrini Green. And what they planted in those gardens were really expensive vegetables, like radicchio and basil and arugula and so on. And they were able to sell these vegetables to some of the best restaurants in Chicago, because the white man who started the gardens was rich, and he knew these guys. They used the proceeds from the sale of the vegetables to establish a college fund for all the kids who were working in the gardens. And over a period of 15 years, 500 kids went to college as a direct result of the money that was raised in the gardens. And in fact, when that little organization was incorporated, it was incorporated by one of those kids who had gone to law school, become a lawyer, and incorporated them as Cabrini Greens. And by that time, they were distributing basil and radicchio and arugula to restaurants throughout the region and funding little programs for little kids, for junior youth, and so on. You see, but we hear the story of the kid who shot another kid, but we don't hear the story about 500 kids whose lives were changed, and the families they established, and the children they raised, and the fact that history changed for a very significant number of people. We don't hear the story of the neighborhood where children were being victimized by gangs, and Black, white, and brown families came together. And they said, well, if we call the police, nothing's going to happen. So we've got to do something. And so what did they do? They cleaned the neighborhood. They put potted plants and flowers on the stoops of the brownstones. They rebuilt the playground at the end of the block, and they reorganized their work schedule so that there will always be parents present when the kids were out of school and playing stickball or whatever in the streets. And within 8 months, crime went from a weekly occurrence to 0. And the gang moved on, not because of the gang task force of the mayor, but because of the unity of Black, white, and brown parents. And when they realized what they had been able to accomplish, they got organized, and they said, we've got some issues with the urgent care facility at the end of the block because we don't think they treat our folks right. We've got some issues with the school, and so forth. And so they began to organize to bring systematic social change to all of those places. All right, so we found those kinds of examples in 60 different communities that we studied rigorously. And the question was, why isn't that in the headline of the news? Because when people realize the amount of change that's occurring, the goodwill that is developing as a result, they'll get excited, they'll want to participate, and they'll want to lend a hand. And I'll tell you what else we found. Everywhere we looked, we found that when people of different races began to establish a model of unity, and it just starts with talking to each other, there were 2 inevitable results. One was a new and special and intimate friendship. But the second was social action that neither one of them had been involved in before. So I'll give you another story. We found a model of a Black Baptist, a white Baptist, and a Baha'i woman, all 3 women who worked in the same place. And it happened that the white Baptist went to the First Baptist Church of Evanston, And the Black Baptists went to the Second Baptist Church of Evanston. You know this story. It started out as one Baptist church, but the white Baptists could sit on the ground floor, and the Black Baptists had to sit in the back in the pew. And so they eventually established their own church. Well, these three women became friends, Black, white, and Persian. And they would meet every day for lunch, and they would talk, and they became friends. And then they hatched on this idea that there ought to be a reconciliation of the Black Baptists and the white Baptists in that town. So they organized an event in which all the white Baptists would start walking through the streets on Sunday morning, and all the Black Baptists would walk from their church through the streets, and that they would meet halfway between both churches. And then they would have a joint ceremony, Sunday service celebrating their mutual love for Christ. And then all of the Black families and the white families had a gigantic picnic, and then they began the real work of getting to know each other and trying to overcome the history of division and the prejudice and all those things. But it's got to start somewhere. So I'll tell you a couple more stories, and then I'll bring it to a conclusion. But I think these are stories that you want to hear. There is a place that we looked at in Marin County, California. Now, Marin County is just slightly less nice than heaven. It's really nice. When you go to Marin County, you think, well, look, if I could die and go there, it'd be okay. I would think I'd lived a good life, and I would be very happy with that, because it's that nice. I mean, I've never seen such a beautiful place in my life. And everybody there got the last dollar you lost, because they got all the money. And right at the end of Marin County begins Imperial Valley. And Imperial Valley is where all the migrant laborers grow all the food that you and I eat. Well, according to California law, the local schools have to educate all the kids in a geographic region. So suddenly, kids from the migrant labor farms were coming into the Marin County School, and the name of the school was the Bahia Vista School. And it's an elementary school from kindergarten to 6th grade. Well, you can imagine, suddenly you've got this rich white elementary school, and that's what it was. It was really rich and it was really white. And suddenly you've got kids who speak 27 different languages, and none of them are English. And you've got an uproar with the parents. The parents are saying, wait a minute, I pay big taxes, and I don't pay big taxes for you to educate those kids. I pay big taxes for you to educate my kids. And they're bugging the mayor, and they're bugging the chief of police, and they're raising hell with the school. And in the meantime, the teachers are going crazy because 27 different languages are spoken in their schools, and they don't speak but one of them. So I was there on the board of visitors of a philanthropic fund called the Buck Trust. And the Buck Trust had given that school a grant to change its mode of teaching into English as a second language. So they'd given them a lot of money, and they had been operating as an English as a second language school for a while. About 4 or 5 years, 6 years actually, had gone by. And here we come, the board of visitors, and we're supposed to look at what you did with the money and see if there's any positive developments and so forth. But you still got 27 languages being spoken and folks. So this is what we saw. We saw that in kindergarten, kids were communicating by pantomime. because they didn't share a common language. So they would just kind of act out what it is they were trying to do and what they needed, and Joey, give me that pencil, but it would be kind of through gestures and so on. They found that the second language that children learn wasn't necessarily English, it was the language of their best friend. And they found that by the 4th grade, kids were fluent in at least 3 languages, including English. Later, as the kids got older and older, they found that these kids were testing above the 90 percentile in the California State Achievement Tests in reading, writing, and mathematics. And by the 6th grade, the average kid spoke 4 languages, was testing in the 90s, and was happy as a clam. Now, here's what else happened. When I would go into the classrooms and look around and say, well, let me just look around and see what I see, I couldn't tell who the teacher was, because there were the rich white folks were there, the migrant mothers and fathers were there, and the teacher was there, but who was the teacher? I couldn't tell. Because in the process of figuring all this out, they had gotten to know each other. Now, from the looks of the screen, most, if not all of us, are parents. Tell me you don't want your child going to a school where they would be fluent in 4 languages and be able to talk to anybody and be able to read, write, and calculate better than anybody else in the state of California. You don't want your kid to go to that school? You don't want your kid to understand all the different ways that a human being can be and be legitimate? You don't want your kid to be able to problem solve across all kinds of social foundations? So here's what they were doing in the school. They had learned that the most effective way to stop conflict and violence was to train the kids to be peer mediators. So they trained all the kids in the principles of consultation, and certain kids had peer mediation badges. And they would go and and if there was a conflict, the peer mediator would show up with their badge, and here's a skinny little spaghetti-armed 8-year-old saying, I'm a peer mediator, there appears to be a conflict. Let's talk about it. And they were skilled at identifying what the source of conflict was, figuring out what's your side of the story, or how can we resolve this, all the conflict mediation skills. And by the way, the same peer mediation program are going on in the biggest ghetto schools in California, in Los Angeles, in Oakland, and San Francisco. And the person who started that is a friend of mine and Jeet's and Jack McCants, and that is Dorothy Nelson, a Baha'i. She's a federal appeals court judge, and she started the peer mediation programs in California. They spread all over the world, but they have really had a measurable effect on the reduction of violence in the schools. Now, here's the other thing they did. They taught these little kids how to meditate. So that, because these kids are digesting a tremendous amount of information. And one of the things that they needed to be able to do was control all the information going in and out of their little 8-year-old brains. And so they taught them a practice called metacognition. And what metacognition is it's learning to think about thinking. So this is how this works. I'm a 7-year-old. And if you ask my kids, that's probably what they would tell you. Dad's got issues. We need to work with Dad. I'm a 7-year-old. I just came in from a rugged game of soccer on the playground at recess. I'm all hyped up. My heart's beating. I'm sweating. I'm excited. I kicked a goal. My brain is everywhere. Now, here's what metacognition helps me do. My metacognition helps me in my little 7-year-old brain say, I was at recess. And at recess, I played soccer. But now I'm back in the classroom. And I need to breathe. I need to slow my heart down. And I need to refocus my mind so that I can learn. That's a hell of a lot of control for a 7-year-old. In fact, that's a hell of a lot of control for an adult. So, I mean, for crying out loud, the truth is, life everywhere would be better if adults could engage in the conscious recognition that I was there, I was feeling this, I was thinking that, but now a different kind of feeling and thought is required of me. And I need to shift gears and focus on that. They're teaching this to 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds. And here's the other thing that they said. They said they've got a program called Every Student is a Leader. They define leadership not by, your class president or you're in charge of this or that. Leadership is defined by anybody who has influence on anybody else. Well, that's all of us. So they define leadership as servant leadership. What should your influence be? It should be an influence of kindness, an influence of fairness, an influence of friendliness, an influence of service. And we make life better for everyone. Well, now the reason that I mention all these places is because these kinds of initiatives literally exist in the tens of thousands all across the United States. And we know this because there are lots of studies that tell us what different communities are doing, how they're doing it, and how it's changing those communities. We see how it's driving down crime and violence-torn neighborhoods. We see how it's bringing people of different races together and so on. And more importantly, we see how communities are beginning to learn how to build walls of bonds and ties of understanding, cooperation, and friendship. So I'll give you just 2 quick examples, because you say, well, Bob, that's great. It's happening in the neighborhoods, it's happening with little kids, and so on. But what about big business? And so let me give you 2 other examples. One is from one of my clients. Now, this client aspired to be the best in the world in their area. They wanted to be the industry leader. They wanted to be #1 in customer satisfaction. They wanted to be known for incredible service. And they wanted to be prosperous. It was a multi-billion-dollar company to begin with. It is now much, much, much richer. But how did they do that? When I started working with them, they had 30,000 employees and 5 Black managers, 5. And they wanted to grow, they wanted to prosper. And I said, well, you're not going to be able to do that. And they said, well, why is it? I said, well, I can help you with your management development systems. I can help you with your leadership systems. We can solve all the strategic problems. None of those things are an impediment to you. You can do them well, you're doing them well now, and we're just going to make them better. But the reason that you're not going to be able to grow is that all your folks come from one place. They are predominantly of one race, and they have one way of looking at life. And if you want to grow, you're going to want to grow into places that are diverse, that have all, that eat different foods, think different ways, have different cultural practices, celebrate different holidays, and so on. And your culture doesn't allow that. So here's what we did. They said, well, we don't know where to get those people. And I said, well, I do. They said, well, where can we find qualified Black applicants? Because we've gone to this conference and that conference and so forth. I said, well, there is a system of institutions right here that you haven't gone to. They said, well, what was it? I said, the Black church. There's every Sunday, there's a big gathering of people, and every pastor wants those families to be prosperous and gainfully employed and to make progress in their jobs and to serve their communities. And so we sent white corporate executives to Black churches every Sunday morning to build relationships. We held job fairs in 39 church parking lots throughout the Northeast. We started training programs for junior high school kids where they would work part-time at the company and have academic support and tutor, and it would take them from junior high through college into a management intern program back into the company. So here we are 20 years later. It's gone from a $2 billion company to a $15 billion company. And 29% of their leadership is of color. 29%. And the employee group has gone from 30,000 to 60,000. So we're talking about a whole lot of folks. Well, how do we do it? First, we made friends and built relationships with institutions in the community. Second, we started to grow our own. We built a program where we could develop talent that was 13, 14, and 15 years old and ride it through, because if you do that, by the time that 13-year-old graduates from college, because of all the tutorial assistance and the academic support programs and so forth, they come into an environment where they know folks and they understand the company and they understand what's being done, and they don't feel like strangers in a strange land. They walk down the halls and they can say hi to everybody because they've known them for 10 years. And so you just build success into the process. Well, that's a great example of how companies, and this isn't the only one. Look, Intel, the computer chip company, has made a $300 million investment in diversity. And if you look at, I can get carried away on this stuff, so I'll just tell you this one thing and then I'll summarize. If you look at what economists are learning about what happens when people of different colors and cultures come together, they find that diverse groups of problem solvers with relevant knowledge are smarter and more able to solve problems than experts in the very area of the problem. And the reason is they don't have any rules. They'll look at any possible solution, they think out of the box and so forth. And the interesting thing is, the harder the problem, the better they do. They're more innovative, the performance is greater, and so forth. But in order to capture those advantages, there are moral and spiritual practices that have to underline the process. You have to be open to hear and value the contributions of all the folks. Because if you don't, you short circuit the system. So the last point that I would make on this is that the Baha'i community has taken a very similar approach. All over the United States, we have thousands of children's groups of kids of all backgrounds, all colors, all religions, all races, all economic backgrounds, learning to be servants of their communities, lovers of God, no matter whether they're Muslims, Christians, Jews, Baha'is, Buddhists, it doesn't matter. Servants of the community and servants of one another. All over the United States, we're working with junior youth to help them see themselves not just as 12 and 13-year-olds, but as world citizens who have the capacity to set in process a completely different kind of development based on a spiritual vision of the oneness of humankind and developing the understandings necessary to be change agents where they are and throughout their lives. And all over the United States, we have Baha'i communities that are focused on race unity, on the equality of women and men, on the mitigation of poverty, on the development of education and understanding. And these spiritual qualities are the essential foundation of the change we want to see. So, in sum, I would just say this. We as Baha'is believe that the establishment of the American nation was no accident, that it was an establishment with purpose. We believe that the challenges we face as a nation are challenges given to us by God as an opportunity to demonstrate the power of God to change bad into good, to change hate into love, to change conflict into unity. And we believe that no matter how few we are, we're willing to work with anybody. Everybody is our friend. Everybody is a part of our family. And so we would, we would want to embrace everyone. But we do have programs and a framework for action that is designed to produce the very promise that the Bible gives us, that in the time of the end, God would give us one heart, and he would write his law on the inner tablets of our heart. And he would put a new spirit of love and unity in our hearts. And he would be with us every day, and he would be our Father, and we would be his children. So as my good friend Jack McCants would say, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And if you all have any questions, I'd be happy to field as many as I can think of.
I can unmute everybody so we can clap at least. All right.
There we go.
Thank you. Now we can.
Thank you.
Bravo, bravo.
Thank you. Thank you. Friends,
Thank you very much.
Unmute everybody so we can clap.
Thank you very,
Thank
very
you.
much. Wonderful. Enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to.
There you go. Unmute yourself, Ajit.
Uh,
There you go.
this has been amazing. I'm so delighted that Bob agreed to. It took a while, number of calls before Bob agreed to do this, but I'm delighted that you did, Bob. Raise your hands electronically if you have a question, or just speak up, unmute yourself and speak up.
Let me see. I think it's a lot. People should be able to unmute themselves.
Unmute yourselves and ask a question if you wish to, or make a comment.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much. Enjoyed it very much. Oh, so good to see everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I especially want to thank Daryl Horton. Really, he and I have become good friends over the last year or two. And what a wonderful opening prayer he said. I'm going to have to start going to Mount Zion Baptist Church more often.
Daryl, it was a beautiful prayer.
Daryl, unmute yourself.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me, my friend. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Dr. Henderson, really appreciated your talk today. You helped me and you've motivated us. So thank you so much for sharing.
Daryl, all my friends call me Bob, and I would regard you as a friend and invite you to do the same.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that.
But Jack, where did Jack go? Jack doesn't have
He's
anything
over
to
there.
say.
I see him, but he's
Okay.
muted.
Okay.
All right, I just asked him to unmute. Let's see if he pops up.
There you go. Now you can say it.
Can you hear me?
Yep,
Yeah.
there you go.
Hey, good to see you.
I'd like to share
Hello.
just a brief quote of Shoghi Effendi's, if I may.
Please.
Sure.
He said, "The faith of Baha'u'llah is a priceless gem of divine revelation, enshrining the Spirit of God and incarnating his purpose for mankind in this age." And I really think Bob's talk reflected that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
Jack, it is so good to see your face and to see Kathy.
Really? Hello.
I'm
Thank
actually.
you. Good.
because I invited a lot of friends, I'm seeing a lot of people. I see somebody from New York. I see a lot of people here. So this is wonderful. This is delightful. You don't know how much we in Austin appreciate you doing this, Bob. This was wonderful.
Well, I tell you what, I ate a lot of candy before because you burn a lot of jet fuel when you talk. So I ate some candy before. I'm going to eat some candy in a minute.
So Shalonda Horton had a question for you, Bob. What guidance do you have for me working with those who do not believe racism exists?
Oh, I mean, come on, really, honestly. I think it's a bigger question, first of all. I think that one of the things we don't talk a lot about is that not only do we have to solve the problem of social injustice against Black people, and for that, John, there is so much data. We choke on it. I mean, I'll just give you a couple of examples. 85% of the time, if I apply for a job and you apply for the job, you get the job. Now that's not my estimate. That's the actual measure. And the reason will never be said to me, Bob, it's because you're Black. They'll say something like, Bob, we're not sure you're a great fit for our culture. We think John would be a better fit for our culture. Now it comes out to the same thing. It's just nicer language. But the same thing happens in houses. I'll give you an example. I have large hospital clients. Now these are healthcare systems that have 20 to 25 hospitals. And I serve the corporate client, and we build management systems and all kinds of stuff. You know, one of our problems is, one of the problems with the hospitals is that doctors will not medicate Black patients at the same level that they medicate white patients. And I'm not saying this. The American Medical Association is saying this because doctors don't feel the pain of Black patients. So, for example, women who are getting a cesarean section, or men who've got a surgery, or any of that, the amount of medication and care you get depends on what color you are. We could go on and on and on about the evidences of racial unfairness and victimization. But let me go to a larger point. The larger point is that we as a country are divided. And interestingly, people on the far right, that is poor white people who may be anti-Black, who may be very conservative in their views. You know, when we talk about unity, it's got to include those folks too. God didn't draw a line and said, all right, we're going to unite the good people and everybody else out of here. We've got to figure out a way to start a conversation with everybody, not just somebody. And we've got to figure out a way, and interestingly, even though they suffer for different reasons, a number of their social and economic disadvantages are the same as those that Black people suffer. Not to the same extent and not with the same boundaries, but they're there and they're very similar. So the larger question, John, is not just, does racism exist? Look, there's a caste system in the United States. And it's a caste system of color, culture, and money. And the lower you are on that caste system, the more bad things happen to you. And what we're talking about is undoing that caste system. Now, if you were thinking about it in human terms, you might think about it as your skeleton, the skeleton of your body. The caste system is the structure of your body. It holds you up. And then your color is the skin. your money is the skin. You know, that's the presentation you make to the world. But we've got to fix that whole problem, not just part of it. We can't fix it for Black people. We got to fix it for Black people, brown people, poor white people, red people, yellow people, all kinds of folks, because it is this identification of people as other that we got to put a stop to. God didn't say, I'm going to give the chosen people one heart. He said, I'm going to give you one heart. That is, all my children are going to get one heart. It's going to be galvanized and it's going to be loving toward everyone. So we've got to, you know, as far as I'm concerned, and this is what Ajit asked me to do, was to talk about the larger conversation that we need to be having. Because it's true, we got to stop the killing on the street. There's no question about that. That's got to be a top priority. And you don't have to ask, I mean, there are people on this call who've been beaten by police. There are people on this call who've been victimized. We've got to put an end to that, and that's got to be a line of action. But if that's all you do, you may solve the problem in the short term, but you don't change the culture in the long term. So we've got to have a broader conversation in order to be, because what we really want is a transformation of American culture at the level of thought, your habits of thought, your habits of the heart, and your habits of behavior. That's what we want to change. And we want to change them in accordance with the law of God and with the teachings of all of our religions.
Thank you. Our dear youth, Ayana, Ms. Donnie, age 15, says, thank you so much for doing this. Your remarks really inspired me because education is a passion of mine, and it's great to hear about how kids were improving on tests because of the amount of diversity in their school, with a smiley face. So yes, our dear sweet Ayana.
Yeah, that is an amazing story. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, if I had only read about it, I kind of half believe it, but I was there. I saw it. Yeah, and I thought to myself, man, I wish every kid in America was a part of this.
Right. And there was a question on YouTube. Yandra asked, what can I do as one person?
You know, I told the story of the guy who went to Cabrini Green. And I got to tell you, this guy was short, fat, and old. So, this is not a guy who could run away from trouble. He's not a guy who could defend himself from trouble. He was just one person. And he started out with basketball knee pads, picking shards of glass and junk out of the dirt, and turned it into hundreds of kids going to college. One person in the most dangerous part of town. No meeting with the community. He just got his basketball knee pads out, got on the dirt and started cleaning it out and making gardens. And pretty soon, it's the most bizarre thing. Gangs protected them because it was something good and positive, and they could see the change it was making. Kids who graduated from college would tell you in a heartbeat, this kept me off drugs, this kept me off alcohol, this kept me from getting pregnant, this kept me in school, this is the reason I went to college. One guy did that, one guy. So, when we think of ourselves, you don't have to start something as significant. I'll give you another story. I went to a Baha'i school on the Navajo reservation. And the kids there were mostly Navajo. Some white kids, some black kids, some Latino kids. So I went into a junior youth class where they were talking about the Baha'i laws. Now this is something. Yeah, I mean, here I am, I'm an adult. And I'm sitting in the back of a class where 11-year-olds are talking about the spiritual laws of our faith and how they apply to them. So these kids decide that the kids in their school have problems. Too many of them have started to experiment with marijuana and with alcohol. Too many of them are starting to get romantic. At 11, you ought to be playing baseball or basketball or something. You ought to be leaving those other folks alone. And so what they decided they would do, they made a little plan, and their plan was, we're going to make friends, true friends, they said, with each one of these folks we know is skating in the wrong way. And we're going to love them up and become their real friends so that they trust us and they love us and they can depend on us because we love them. And gradually, as we develop these relationships, we're going to talk to them about what they're concerned in or what they want for their lives. And we're going to help them come away from drugs and cigarettes and alcohol and sex and so forth. These were 11-year-olds. And you know, when a group of 11-year-olds start to talk like that, and they believe that they are carrying out the spiritual teachings of their faith, you can't stop them. Because they know in their hearts that what they're doing is right. And what a beautiful plan. They didn't say we're going to go lecture to them. They said we're going to go love them. We're going to become their true friends. We're going to develop confidence in these relationships. And when we get that confidence, they're going to tell us their problems. We're going to tell them our problems, and we're going to find a way to live a better life. And I came out of that meeting and I thought to myself, this is going to work. These kids are onto something powerful and strong, and it's going to work. So my answer to the question is, do what's available to you, but don't doubt for a second that it isn't going to make a difference, because it is going to make a difference. But it's got to be driven by love. It's got to be driven by patience and understanding. And it's got to be driven with an open heart and an open mind.
Thank you. Wonderful.
I have a comment and a question. So may I, Bob?
Please.
It's Atusa. Hi. My comment was that I think the first question and the second question are kind of tied together, in that when Shalonda was saying, what is your advice for people that don't believe in racism? And in my experience, because I've had a lot of friends who also didn't believe that systemic racism existed, nor did they believe that I had a different experience as a woman of color that they did. And the only thing in the end that convinced them was their love for me and their willingness to hear with empathy my experience and the experience of other people that they became close to. So just like your junior youth, their strategy was to connect heart to heart. That is, in my experience, the only strategy that convinces people that don't believe in systemic racism in understanding it, if someone is not inclined to. In fact, with respect to climate change and racism, studies have shown that the more evidence you present, the more someone becomes entrenched in their false belief that something doesn't.
No, that's exactly right. You know, it not only entrenched. Part of the irony is that when you do diversity training or when you do anti-racism training, people actually get more prejudice as opposed to less prejudice. I mean, it's you know, that's not the drill.
No.
It's not me trying to convince you that you're thinking wrong and you've got to change the way you think. It's developing a new sense of possibility in life because of a different kind of relationship. Look, if you're talking about systemic racism, I went to a really nice university, so classically New Englandy that you could put it on a calendar. And when I was there, I'm looking around and I'm a California kid. And so, you know, I've never been to Massachusetts before, and I'm looking at this. I've never seen snow before. And we've got just a handful of Black students on this university campus. And so a funny thing happened every Friday. Every Friday, the campus police would round up all the Black male students and arrest us. And they put us in jail overnight, over the weekend, because they were afraid that the white women would get raped if we had free time. And so they would charge us with trespassing, knowing we were students, and let us out on Monday so we could go to class. I'm serious. It's just ridiculous. And so the game became quickly, we're not completely stupid. The deal is hide on Friday because you'll get arrested. But it is not possible to argue.
No,
Whether
and
we're
if I
talking
told
about
that
old
story to
examples or
someone,
new examples.
and maybe if someone
that
heard
racism
story-
isn't a dominant feature in our.
So I
Go
was
ahead.
saying that if you told that story, Robert, to someone who didn't know you and trust you, they might not even believe it's true. They might say, "Oh, there's something like that couldn't really happen on an American."
Look, the truth of the matter is, I used to get stopped by police all the time for grand theft of my own car.
Yeah, exactly. So there you go.
And it was my car. So I started carrying the title of the car in the glove compartment just to cut down the amount of time it took me to convince the cop not to take me into jail. It's absurd to think that there isn't racism in the country and that it's not systemic and supported by policy. That's just absurd.
So my question, I'm sorry, I didn't get to my question, which was,
please.
You alluded to this, how the junior youth program is basically a worldwide human resource development program that people don't realize that's what, I think even Baha'i communities think of it as community building and maybe safeguarding the spiritual future of that child, which it is both of those things. But what I was going to ask you is, in communities where you feel like people have seen the junior youth program for its potential in that regard, how has that come about? Has there been an open dialogue regarding the fact that we are building human resources for the future civilization? It's kind of embedded within some of the junior youth materials, but sometimes people on the outside who aren't within the program, they don't really understand its importance and therefore don't do the same kind of support for the junior youth program that they would do, say, for study circle or hosting devotional gatherings.
I'll give you just a quick story about a junior youth group I was just visiting just before the quarantine. I was in Florence, South Carolina, and I was in the home of an 85-year-old white woman who was a junior youth animator to a group of about 17 Black kids from the neighborhood that she lived in. And I came into the house and it was instantly clear that the kids ran the show. Now, this was not because she was an ineffective leader. It was precisely because she had empowered them. She loved them up. She created reasonable and clear expectations about what was going on. They were celebrating the Baha'i holy days. They were praying from all of the holy books. They were studying the materials, and they had a sense of their own power to affect change. So here's how they did it. They were, once they got a sense of themselves, they were just like the kids who were also junior youth on the Navajo reservation. They had a sense of their own power and they wanted to do something. So when they heard that one of the seniors in the community was ill, they went and cut her lawn and cleaned her house and brought her food and so on because they could. Now, would they have done that before? Maybe one of them would do it, but they weren't thinking like that. But suddenly they had a sense of collective responsibility about we are leaders in the service of our community. That's how they identified themselves. And so the one of the super seniors in their neighborhood had passed away. And they were concerned that because she had passed away, her lawn wasn't being cut, her house didn't look that good. So, but there was a sign on the thing, on the fence that said, keep out and blah, blah, blah. So they crafted a plan to sneak in, cut her lawn, pretty up the front of her house so that it wouldn't look bad because Miss Jones wouldn't like her house looking like that. The point being that as soon as they felt that power, that sense of mission, that sense of identity as a leader in community service, they took that power and they started to act on it. And they acted on it in their spiritual study, in their prayer, in their relationship with one another, and in their community service. And ironically, one of the members of the group was secretly a high school student. And this came out afterwards, because this is for 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 11 to 15. But she was 16 and she was in high school and so on. But she was having a little difficulty transitioning because high school was rough in Florence. And she felt the love and the comfort and the safety of the group. So, when I was asked about it, I said, darling, stay in the group. There is no reason why you got to go anywhere but here. But I think that if we could develop, so last part about these kids. One of the kids was a skinny little 12-year-old named Eric. And beautiful, high energy, spaghetti arms, jumping around, full of energy. And his buddy had come with him now several times. And as we were going around, we introduced him. And I asked his buddy, I said, well, how did you learn about the group and why are you here? I said, well, he said, well, I learned about it from Eric. And Eric came to me and he said, Calvin, you need to be closer to God. So you need to come with me to group. And that's why he was there. And so he kept coming and he kept enjoying it. So Eric, who had something to say about everything. In the beginning of the meeting, Eric says, well, I'm gonna be a lawyer because lawyers control stuff and they run stuff. Toward the end of the meeting, same kid says, you know what? I've changed my mind. I'm gonna be a second grade math teacher. Because if I can convince little black kids that they're smart in the second grade, it could change their lives. That's a 12-year-old. That's a 12-year-old. That's phenomenal. And to go from a vision of me as powerful to a vision of me as a servant who could change the life of a 7-year-old in second grade and put them on the right road and convince them that they're smart and capable, oh, that's phenomenal. That's what the junior youth program is doing. And what it's teaching kids is not just that they can serve their community, it's teaching kids that they can change the world.
All right. Friends, I had said that I would end this at 9, and we're getting very close to 9. But there's 2 questions. I think one is from Jackie Newberry. And Jackie, would you go ahead and ask your question? We'll try to make that the last one.
Okay.
Where are you, Jackie?
Yeah, I'm there. I just turned on my microphone.
Oh.
I really, really appreciated the history that you gave of this country, because I think a lot of us are unaware of that. I'm speaking for myself as a white person. And for so long, we've seen in this country, the decision makers have always predominantly been white people.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of, when I've been working on this, is coming to realize how we have been conditioned in our thinking and conditioned in our by stereotypes and prejudices about people of color that we don't even know we've been conditioned about. And this is part of the letter that was from the Universal House of Justice, July 22nd. And one of the things that I think has come to be an important part is the teaching of the pupil of the eye, the importance of the Black people in this world, in bringing about world peace, because they have the vision, they have the experience, they see for us what many of us white people cannot see. And that I think more people are now understanding that those are the voices that we need at the table in every one of our institutions, in every one of our communities, in every place, in every decision we make, there should be the voices of people of color who are also there, giving their input to make the decisions, to make a better world.
Jackie, you know what, first of all, thank you for your comment. But second, as I was saying before, every bit of science and empirical research and practical experience tells us that when the group is large and diverse, all of us are smarter than any one of us. And the ability for us to solve problems, the ability for us to come up with innovative solutions, the ability for us to make change grows when we have a diverse range of views that have equal weight in a decision-making process.
Question from my friend Millie. Millie, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Well, here, I'll ask her. She texted to me. It's an excellent question. I'll preface this by saying this is a question I've had as well. When we're talking about positive change in culture, particularly, you know, company change. You talked about companies that have experienced changes in culture recently. How do you engage company leaders in conversation about racial initiatives so their efforts are not just merely paying lip service to the idea of diversity? It seems like since the killing of George Floyd, every corporation formed task forces to make their companies more inclusive, etc. How do you engage in those efforts without getting sucked into an empty initiative? How do you lead change for a corporation? Because, you know, some of the things that we had even talked about, even in our own Austin, particularly I group and stuff, we had mentioned some of these things. It seemed like people are willing to do symbolic things, but where does the change come fundamentally to take it even a step further? It's one thing to say we believe in diversity, you know, and I think Dr. Cornel West talks about, you know, having Black faces in high places, but talking about the importance of getting even more change, of getting of fundamentally changing the behaviors and such.
So first of all, Chris, that's a great question. It is a complicated question. So I'll give you the kind of 30-second summary. First of all, there's a much bigger history than we actually know. I mean, I could make a case that the greatest race champion corporation in the country is IBM. I mean, they've done phenomenal things since the 50s to promote racial unity and equity. And as a matter of fact, over time, it's one of the reasons why they've survived as a company. I would also say to you that it is not just a question of racial equity. That's absolutely critical, and everybody ought to wanna, and everybody kind of wants to, and some companies really want to. But here's the larger question. In today's modern age, it's not just a question of having money and raw materials and labor to make money. If you really want to go forward in the knowledge age, you've got to have three things. You've got to have the constant generation of new knowledge. You've got to be able to unify the diversity of your workforce and your executive leadership. And you've got to infuse your organization with trust. If you do that with skill, then you get two outcomes. The first is social cohesion or unity. And the second is the opportunity for economic prosperity. It is a matter of fact that companies with diverse leadership have a 35% greater opportunity to make money, to prosper, than companies without. It's a matter of fact. It's a matter of fact that companies with diverse leadership and diverse membership solve problems more effectively than companies without. It's a matter of fact. I mean, you know, we can look at the data, we can show the cases. It's a matter of fact that they innovate better. So what we're really not talking about as much, but is the central underlying theme here, is this is the way God intended reality to function. And so it's no wonder that you prosper in every way. You prosper socially, you prosper intellectually, you prosper materially, you prosper spiritually. And you know, Chris, there are, you know, we could look at Intel, we could look at IBM, we could look at Wegmans, we could look at American Express. There are just too many examples.
Xerox.
Where they have made tremendous progress.
Well, I grew up in an IBM family, so that's where my mother made her career. So I appreciate that. Wonderful.
So let me summarize tonight's evening and just tell you all what a great joy it has been to participate, organize this event, and how grateful I am to Bob Henderson for agreeing to do this. I hope you will come back again next month, because we are going to do this every month. Yeah, next month, every month, first Friday of the month, we will have a talk from a different speaker. And I've already asked Bob when he'll come back and speak the next time, so he's on the calendar. But the next two speakers are for October, it's a gentleman named Hooper Dunbar. And for November, it's a gentleman named, the heck, I'm drawing blank. Chris, who did I invite for December? For
Rain
November?
Wilson.
Rain Wilson. So that's our upcoming schedule. Bob, thank you again. Thank you everybody for participating. It's been a great joy and a delight to see all of you. And I've seen so many faces from the past. I even Farhan from Nashville showed up, which is a good thing to have see some old friends. So thank you all, and I'll see you all next first of the week, first of next month. First
See you
Friday.
later. Thank you, Ajit.
Thank you again, Bob.